Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking after what is to be the last big reshuffle, at least we think so, in the 14 months that separate us from the next presidential election. François Hollande keeping his prime minister, Manuel Valls, keeping a lot of important ministers. But there were some changes. We're talking about it with our politics editor, Marc Perlman. We're also in the company of Pierre-Alexandre Tellier, co-founder of Gov, which is a real-time opinion survey app. Also with us from the youth wing of the Socialist Party, Simon Rioux, welcome back. And from Bristol, Jim Shields of Aston University. As we were saying in part one of our discussion, Jean-Marc Ayrault to be working under the orders of the man who once served under him as his interior minister. Belle Lupton has more.
Handing over the reins back in 2014, Jean-Marc Ayrault stepped aside to let Manuel Valls take his place as Prime Minister. He'd led the government for just 22 months, but the Socialist Party's crushing defeat in local elections needed a scapegoat.
This election result is a failure for the government and for the people.
Ayrault stepped off the national stage and returned to his constituency of Loire-Atlantique in western France. Politically active from a young age, Ayrault joined the Socialist Party at just 21. He became Nantes' youngest mayor 6 years later and reinvented the city. First appointed in 1988, he was re-elected 3 times. Nationwide, he's better known for the 15 years he spent leading the Socialist Parliamentary Group in the National Assembly. And on the international stage, his love of Germany was ever apparent. During his 2 years as Prime Minister, the former German teacher strengthened ties with France's important European neighbour. Abroad and at home, Ayrault has always been loyal to François Hollande. Testing that loyalty now, the question of stripping terror-related criminals of their nationality. Ayrault has always been against the measure, while his president is in favour.
All right, and Pierre-Alexandre Tellier quipping that his main diplomatic credential is the ability to speak German. Marc Perlman, let me ask you, because you remember the rumors had been swirling. They'd even said that the mother of François Hollande's 4 children, the current environment minister, Ségolène Royal, had been perhaps tipped to be the next foreign minister.
Yes, clearly it was a fight, if you wish, between her and...
So there was something there.
Yeah, there was clearly something there. We know diplomats were up in arms because Ségolène Royal is known as someone who likes to speak her mind, and when you have to negotiate with countries that are very sensitive and so on, diplomats were really afraid that she would go wild. And so probably François Hollande knows Jean-Marc Ayrault very well. He dismissed him as prime minister, but they get along quite well. Jean-Marc Ayrault is someone who's always under control. What's also interesting is not so much his foreign policy experience. He speaks German, that's fine with Angela Merkel, but that doesn't mean you're a good diplomat. Is that he's someone who will not do blunders, and also who has a sizable support among socialists, because he was the socialist leader in parliament for a long, long time. And this is what this reshuffle is essentially about. It's about next year's election.
But at the UN Security Council, will the Iranians and the Russians care? And
yeah, well, it's François Hollande is the president, and he's the one who's doing most of the job anyway in terms of foreign affairs. This is how France works. The president is the one who decides to go to war or to negotiate. But what I'm saying is that Jean-Marc Ayrault is there basically to reassure the Socialist Party, because he has a following within the Socialist Party. François Hollande knows there's a lot of resistance. He sees this in votes in Parliament, so he wants more control. He brings in the Greens because he wants them to support him for next year's presidential election. And so that's what his goal is. Jim Shields was saying the Socialists have between 25 and 30% of support. If François Hollande can get this figure at the first round of the presidential election next year, it probably means he can reach the second round. And that's his only objective right now, because if things remain the same, his opponent would likely be Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far right. And if he goes to the second round, the assumption is that even people on the right who might not like him would still vote for him. So his immediate goal is, I need to qualify for round 2 of the presidential election, and this is why I'm doing this right now.
All right, so 2 important points in what you've said. I'm going to pick up on both of them with you, Simon Rion, first of all. Is Jean-Marc Ayrault the man for the job as foreign minister?
I don't know. I can't judge if Jean-Marc Ayrault is good for the job. I know that Laurent Fabius has made a very good job, and with the COP21, it has been a tremendous success. Jean-Marc Ayrault, I don't know, he's a European, and that's very important, a Europeist. He likes Germany, as you said, and I think it's important that today we can negotiate with Germany, we can speak freely with Germany, because on economic issues at the European level, we know it's where it's complicated between France and Germany, between the monetary deals. So I don't know. I think he'll be good for the job, but let's see.
Pierre-Alexandre Tellier, do you wish you'd seen Ségolène Royal as foreign minister?
Might have been interesting, let's say. But no, what I'm observing is the fact that the past 3 foreign affairs ministers used to be formerly prime ministers. So I don't know if we are discussing symbols or if it's a way to show the world that France is only putting high-level people to this assignment. But this is interesting to observe, at least.
And do you agree with Mark Perman that it's all about domestic politics? Naming Jean-Marc Ayrault has nothing to do with France's standing on the world stage?
It was my point from the beginning. This government reshuffle is only done to prepare the election from the party's standpoint, and not from the voters, citizens, French people, governors, whatever.
Jim Shields, is Jean-Marc Ayrault the best man for the job as foreign minister?
I think he's a good man. I think what Hollande can rely upon above all else, and what he needs above all else right now, is loyalty. And that's what he'll get from Ayrault, even although Ayrault is on the other side of the fence on this great constitutional reform debate. Hollande can rely on him not to rock the boat, and as Mark has said, to bring the Socialist Party, or a large part of it, with him. So I think in that sense, he's a stabilising appointment. He won't rock things. On the contrary, he will help to consolidate things at a time when Hollande really needs to consolidate.
All right, and you were mentioning just before the break this constitutional reform you allude to. Right now it has passed the National Assembly. It's headed to the Senate. There's going to be a to and fro before there's a joint session of Parliament that is convened. In it, a very controversial point, which is the stripping of French citizenship for dual nationals convicted of terror acts. It's torn apart the left. A couple of weeks ahead of the vote, the Justice Minister, Christine Taubira, resigned over the reform. She was replaced by a confidant of the Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who on Wednesday rejected criticism in Parliament.
We are only talking about terrorists. The only difference is between terrorists and the French people. That's where the fundamental difference is.
165 socialists voted for, 36 abstained, 83 broke ranks, like backbench rebel Pascal Cherki.
This measure is not effective at all, and it only does one thing: divide us. I think we need to be united in the face of terrorism, and we're more divided now than we were before the attacks, which is pretty paradoxical. I'm not in favor of this measure.
Simon Rion, the idea of a constitutional reform, it was put forth in the days that followed the November Paris attacks. Before the break, Jim Shields said it was the biggest political blunder this country has seen since the then President Jacques Chirac dissolved Parliament and lost a snap election.
I don't know. We will see if it passes. I think it's a really bad thing.
Would you have voted for or against?
I would have voted against, because I think it creates two categories of citizens, and that France, it's liberty, equality, fraternity, and that creating that divides the nation in a moment in which we should be united. After the attacks, we had a very bad year, and France needs to be united, and creating two categories of citizens to my mind, it's not a good thing.
And how divided is your party right now? And do you feel it in meetings, or is there a lot of friction?
I think it's divided in two parts, and division. It was an economic division in the last 6 months about economic policy, and now the division in its values and what should we do? Should we vote this reform or not? And
could that division lead to a divorce?
I don't know.
Split?
I have no idea. I think if it continues like that, and if the reform is voted, it will go to a split, because we can't continue working with people that are not on the same, that doesn't have the same values.
And would such a split be possible before the presidential election?
It can be possible. After, I don't know if it will happen, but it would be a big problem for the Socialist Party if it happens.
By the way, this constitutional reform also dividing the right. On the side of Nicolas Sarkozy's Les Républicains party, the vote in the lower house, 111 for, 74 against, 8 abstentions. Sarkozy's was in favor. His former prime minister, though, breaking ranks with his boss.
Nous allons donc rester encore des semaines et des semaines.
We still have weeks and weeks to debate a bill which will never make it to Congress, because there's no majority to vote for it. So I'd advise President Hollande to drop this bill and focus on real issues affecting the country.
Pierre-Alexandre Tellier, how divided is the right?
Well, politicians or people?
Well, those who are eventually going to be voting on this constitutional reform.
Politicians are divided, whether they are from the left wing or from the right wing. What's interesting to observe is that when François Hollande proposed this measure to the Congress just after the November attacks, he received a standing ovation. 100% of left-wing and right-wing parties were applauding. And he did not change a word in what he's proposing today. But de facto, we have to observe that about 75% of future voters are now against that, but not from ideological standpoint, just because they think it's useless. Does anyone reasonably think that by quitting someone's nationality, he will say, oh no, I will not commit this bombing attack? No, because it's useless. So within the emotion, everybody was in favor. Now, 3 months after, people are thinking about useful things.
Again, Marc Perlman, are we underestimating François Hollande?
Well, everyone has always underestimated him, except himself. But that's been the story of his political career.
Because when you see the right that's also divided over
yes,
this.
Obviously. I just want to, I mean, clearly, in terms of public opinion, the polls are pretty much in favor of that measure.
Used to be, it totally changed.
Yeah, it's changing now. But what's also changed is the government has had to change the proposals, because it's not about dual nationals anymore. It's about all French citizens because of this issue of discrimination. Now the issue is whether this will mean rendering people stateless. If you strip them and they only have one citizenship, by their definition, they become stateless. So that's the big issue.
Which France can't do because it's signed conventions. That
yes, but the government is saying we'll ratify a convention that really makes this an exceptional case. But the thing is, obviously, as we have all been saying, this would only concern very few individuals who are terrorist convicts, who will spend years in jail. So the case will present itself after François Hollande and all the other politicians we see now will be out of politics. So it's true that the people are wondering, why are we spending so much time, energy, divisions in both camps on this issue when we should be more concerned about What should the police be able to do? What should the judges be able to do to fight terrorism? Do we agree with house arrest? Do we agree with searches being conducted at night? And the debate, the constitutional reform, is mostly about this. But the debate has been stifled, hijacked, you name it, by this issue. And this is why people are getting irritated, because they want to talk about this or about fighting unemployment and not about an article in constitutional reform nobody really understands anymore.
All right, and this idea of being tough on law and order, after all, it is a former Interior Minister, Jim Shields, who is now the Prime Minister of France. Is that going to win back those working class voters, a lot of whom have jumped to the far right, National Front?
Yes, and I think that even if this measure goes through, and it may well go through, and we won't know, of course, for weeks and weeks whether it will go through, and during that time, yet more political capital will be consumed by it. But even if it does go through, it will be a Pyrrhic victory, because in terms of its utility, as has been said, it's exceptionally limited. It's extremely limited. There's very little that François Hollande can't do now that he will be able to do if this measure goes through. So the disproportionate amount of energy and political capital that has been expended on it is really quite remarkable. The other thing,
again, Jim, I got to interrupt you there. Are you suggesting that he's got it wrong, or is this a Machiavellian sort of plot to divide his opponents of the right?
Well, if it is a plot to divide his opponents of the right, and there may be an element of that, I don't think it's going to work, because even if the Republicans were markedly split on this vote, if you look at the motivations for why they were split, there are a number of them, yes, that are split on the if you like, the juridical constitutional argument that we shouldn't tamper with the Constitution in this way. But there are others around Juppé, around Fillon, who are against it really as a sort of proxy for being against Sarkozy. So Hollande would be wrong to think that he will carry some sort of ecumenical unity with part of the right beyond this measure. I don't think he will. I think really on the right there's an internal battle already going on, which is to do with the primaries later this year.
There's the word primaries. French politics looking more and more like U.S. politics. We have primaries. This time, for sure, there'll be some on the right. They're talking about having some on the left, although most of those in the high halls of power are against that concept. A February 6th poll for newspaper Le Parisien by the Oxoto Polling Institute seems to be a stinging rebuke for both François Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy, the pair that squared off in the presidential election runoff last time in 2012. On the right, it's the former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Alain Juppé, who is listed as the man who is favored. On the left, this was really surprising, Simon Rioux, Emmanuel Macron on 24%, according to this poll. The incumbent president of France, François Hollande, polling something like fourth, 9%. What does that say when Emmanuel Macron is...
I think it says that, like you said before, French people, they want new politicians, they want a new way of doing politics. I'm not sure Emmanuel Macron is the man for the job. He hasn't been elected. He was councillor from François Hollande before being minister. And Alain Juppé, it's the same. It's something really strange because he was prime minister a really long time ago. He's very old. And when people say we want renewals in French politics, and they're saying Alain Juppé is the man for the job, I think it's not logical.
He was a deeply unpopular prime minister, I should add.
He was deeply unpopular. But when you look at those numbers, what does that tell you? Is it mission impossible for François?
I'm always happy when I'm seeing poll opinions confirming what we observe on Gov as well. Yes, the two most popular politicians in France are clearly Emmanuel Macron and Alain Juppé. And probably,
what does that mean?
Okay, one is old, one is young. That's not the purpose. Both of them seem to be free. Alain Juppé is old. Okay, perhaps he will run only for one mandate and promise to try new things, to change things. And people are able to believe him precisely because he's saying that he will only run for a 5-year mandate. Emmanuel Macron is young, he is daring to discuss every French taboo, so he looks to be free. And people need to feel this wind of freedom and new solutions that have not been tried until now.
Mark Proman, what's your prediction then?
My prediction is that Emmanuel Macron will not run for president, at least not this time around. I mean, obviously, people on the right should be very happy because Emmanuel Macron is considered to the right or even the far right of the Socialist Party. The Conservatives would welcome him with open arms because he's a former banker and he's pretty much
called into question the 35-hour working week.
Exactly, and so on. And Alain Juppé is a classical right-wing politician, moderate, but clearly, what's known here as a liberal. But Alain Juppé obviously is running for the primary on the right. The polls are very favorable to him. That being said, he's facing Nicolas Sarkozy, who's a ferocious campaigner, and it will be rough and ugly, probably, because there's a real competition.
And we're getting back to the point that was made in part one of our discussion. When we look at those numbers, and sorry, Simon Rioux, but we look at those numbers, we get the sense that France is moving away from the left and the far left.
Yes, I mean, well, this is probably also part of the calculation of François Hollande, why he's toying towards the center, because he feels the country has moved to the right because of a number of issues, including on the international scene, terrorism, migrant crisis, and so on. There's one person who's not on this poll, it's Marine Le Pen. According to the polls, she would be ahead in the first round of the presidential election and qualified for round two. And we go back to what I was saying earlier. This is why there is going to be a huge fight between the left and the right to be her opponent in an eventual runoff, because this more or less guarantees that you will become president of the Republic. You can be president with only getting 25% in round one. That could be enough. And this is why François Hollande, as you said, probably feels he's underestimated, but he believes there's still a very thin way for him to get to be the next president.
All right, he's at 9% on February the 11th. Mark Proman, I'm writing this down. We're going to
write it down.
Many thanks, Mark Proman. I want to thank Simon Rioux. I also want to thank as well Pierre-Alexandre Tellier, Jim Shields for joining us from Bristol. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. Lots online, obviously, about the cabinet reshuffle. We'll start with an image from the slate.fr website, where you have all of the people who've been evicted from the cabinet in various reshuffles. And one head is circled there.
It's amazing. It's 2 hours after, 2 or 3 hours, we're on air, 2 or 3 hours after the reshuffle.
That's right.
People have had time to go to Photoshop.
The graphics departments have been busy, and you can see there in black and white all of the shadows that have been left behind. And one head circled, that is Jean-Marc Ayrault, the exception, because he left and he came back. It's a bit of a sort of a dance that he's been engaged in. And apparently he's a fan of... what do you call these things? Not mobile homes, camper vans.
Camper vans.
Apparently he likes them and frequently holidays in them, despite probably having a budget to have a slightly fancier holiday.
It's probably in Brittany. That's right.
So there you go. Back is the headline there. And somebody else saying, no, in fact, he's not back. He's still searching for his pride, because he came back into the government, but in a lower position. So look, it's Twitter. People are being a little bit silly. And we also have, this is the third former Prime Minister to be the French...
she stole that line from Pierre-Alexandre Tellier.
There you go. But the Ayrault being the exception, because it's in the same 5-year span. What else do we have? People, well, then obviously taking apart and picking apart the various different appointments. The new junior ministries, one called the Real Equality junior ministry, le secrétariat d'État chargé de l'égalité réelle.
And there's another minister for the simplification of the state?
That's right. But I think real equality implies that there is unreal equality.
Unreal equality.
So equality is, anyway, look, there's people having fun with that as well. This is, well, indeed, just an example of that. That's one person trying to figure out what real equality is. Headlines in the British press, if we just want to take a quick look at them. President François Hollande facing insurrection as he struggles to reshape his government. And this is meant to bolster his flagging hopes of re-election. Well, that's what we've just been hearing on set. François Hollande brings Greens to government in cabinet reshuffle. And of course, that's the other big subject of conversation, the fact that the Greens are back in government. A lot of people very critical of the decision by those Green Party members, some of them to come into government. I'll just trying to click forward a little bit to find examples of that. Indeed, Mediapart, the left-leaning news website, saying that this is really a fatal blow for the Green Ecology Party, that it's going to be very badly viewed because
it's going to split the party.
It's going to split the party, indeed. Open Europe, a tweet in English there saying that François Hollande is trying to do the splits, keeping Macron as is Hollande's wink to markets and investors, and the Greens' return to government is a wink to the left, so an attempt to please all sides. A lot of jokes online at the expense of some of the new Green ministers, such as Mr. Placé, who's unfortunately, his surname means to be placed, so a lot of people have been...
Oh, I see.
Yes. Il a été placé, etc. And here he is sleeping.
And he was openly courting this post, wasn't he?
I
think that's half the joke.
Here he is, apparently, on front of his mobile phone, hoping that François Hollande will give him a phone call. And here he is sleeping outside the Élysée Palace. So people have him, are depicting him as quite desperate for that position. We'll just finish with this headline saying a lot of people also publicly refused any appointments, such as Martine Aubry, the former head of the Socialist Party, people not wanting to be associated with this government for whatever reason.
All right. James Creedon.
Thanks, François.
Many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.